Thank you, Sandy. Yeah, it's 8 o'clock my time and time to start. Good evening to all of you, the seekers of wisdom, poetry, and spirituality, all three of them mostly synonymous with each other. On behalf of Bethlehem Centre, Cobb Institute, the Interfaith Center of Arkansas, myself and Jay McDaniel welcome you back to the fourth session of our series. When I joined the class today, I heard, I think Lois and Gary talked about the recording. So if you were here with us last time, welcome back. If you joined us through the video, I hope you found some community in the recordings that we sent you and the poems that we sent you. So just a little bit reminder, last time we talked about yearning, zeal, compassion, and forgiveness. Today, our first letter is again from F. F for not forgiveness this time, but F for faith. And we'll talk about F for faith in the first half of the class. And then in the second half, we'll talk about two letters, I for imagination and P for play. Jay and I think, and the reason we put these letters together is because we feel they are very much intertwined in their spirit and function, faith, imagination, and play. And I think it will come out more and more as class moves on. So I was looking at the spirituality and website and practice website just before joining the class. And they say that in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, faith is defined as an acceptance of certain religious doctrines, which we all know is quite true. Whereas in Hinduism and Buddhism, it is more like an attitude of devotion that opens a gateway to spiritual practice. So I've been thinking about the mystic poets, Rumi and Hafiz, that we are talking about. And you will see that in their poetry, the faith that comes out is much more than the structure that the Islam has given to Rumi and Hafiz, than the do's and don'ts of any organized religion, then the subtractions and additions of what a constructed religion gives us. So I thought I would start with the first poem, which describes that pretty well from Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. And Rumi says, and it's one of the most, if not the most, but one of the 2-3 most famous poems of Rumi that has ever been quoted in the world. So probably most of you know that, but it goes, out beyond the ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. Out beyond the ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. Then the soul lies down in that grass. The world is too full to talk about. Ideas, languages, even the phrase each other doesn't make sense. Nothing makes sense. Out beyond the ideas of wrong and right, there is a field. I will meet you there. I think that's quite the foundation, a lot of mystical poetry when it comes from Hafiz and Rumi. And that's the first thing I wanted to highlight about faith, that faith is much larger than the do's and don'ts of the religion. The second thing which I want to talk about faith is, and as I was wondering about it, I thought I'll share something about myself. Whenever I introduce myself to people, I always say, I'm a woman of faith. I'm a person of faith. So I started to think about it. What does it mean? And honestly, I grappled with it. I couldn't figure out what faith means to me. It's not necessarily the religion that I ascribe to or the practices that I engage in, religious practices. I don't even know if I know what faith means to me because it's different every day. But one thing which I did realize, and I've been reflecting on it throughout the day, is that faith is more like a relationship for me. And it changes. It changes on a daily basis. Sometimes it's deep, sometimes it's not. And then I went back to one of the favorite definitions of faith, not definitions, but descriptions of faith that I have read, and that's from Father Richard Rohr. And when he talks about faith, Richard Rohr says that people of real faith seem able to hold increasing amounts of chaos in one tranquil and ordered life. And I'm bringing you Richard Rohr's quote because that is closest to my heart when it comes to talking about faith. So he says that people of real faith seem able to hold increasing amount of chaos in one tranquil and ordered life. Faith seems to make them spacious, non-controlling, and waiting in awareness. The faith Jesus praises as salvation, which is sufficient in lepers and Samaritans and those outside the temple, is something very different than religion as such. It is a capacity within people to contain and receive all things with almost no fear. Faith-filled people are secure at a deeper level where there is room for everyone. It is just a very spacious place to be. So all of that was a quote from Father Richard Rohr that I will send to you. So I brought a poem which I think is related to that quote. And the poem is from Hafiz Shirazi, in which Hafiz, the name of the poem is Stop Being So Religious. And Hafiz, being the playful Hafiz who he is, he says, stop being so religious. And he starts by saying, what do sad people have in common? It seems they have all built a shrine. What do sad people have in common? It seems that they have all built a shrine to the past. And they often go there and do a strange wail and worship. What is the beginning of faith? It is to stop being so religious like that. It is to stop being so religious like that. So that was my second point of faith. And the third thing which I want to highlight about faith is that what faith does for us, or at least does for me. And I think faith gives me a way to move forward, a vision. Faith gives me a vision. It helps me feel my way forward in this world. It gives me hope. It helps me cultivate hope, and it helps me express hope. And in alignment with that theme, I give you the third poem on faith, which is from Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. And in that poem, Rumi says, "Oh soul, oh dear, dear soul, you worry too much. You have seen your own strength, you have seen your own beauty, you have seen your golden wings. Of anything less, why do you worry? You are in truth. You are in faith. You are in the soul of the souls of the soul." Oh soul, you worry too much. So Jay, these were the three poems that I wanted to present on faith. And with that, I hand to you.
Well, as usual, I think that what Sophia says surpasses anything I have to say, but I'll say what I need to say anyway. I went to seminary to become a Christian minister many years ago. And I think when I went to seminary, I thought of faith as belief. So I thought to have faith is to have certain beliefs that give you confidence. and give you security. But somehow over the years, I actually, even in seminary, I came to see faith differently from that. It had more to do with an attitude of trust than with formal beliefs. And people could believe different things, but still they could approach life with an attitude of trust. And that's kind of what process theology is about. It's not trust that everything happens for a reason. It's not trust that everything is God's will. It's not trust that everything that happens will be good. But it is trust in the availability of fresh possibilities, no matter what happens. And so I want to key in on that phrase, trust in the availability of fresh possibilities. Trust in the possibility of newness. And so faith, as understood that way, does not really look back so much to what has been. It looks forward to what can be, given the situation at hand. And God is in the can be. God is in the fresh possibilities. There's another aspect of God I want to mention that Sophia's last poem brings out. God is also an open space. So when I think of God, I think of a wideness that includes everything, with some kind of compassion, some kind of love. I don't know if that sounds too abstract or not, but I'll mention three faces of faith. And by the way, I think we can have degrees of faith. And I think sometimes we can have faith and sometimes we don't have faith. And that's okay. But three faces of faith. And one is, I'm going to call it honesty. Honesty, and in this case, I want to say honesty to emotions. And here, I'm very much influenced by Judaism, and more specifically by the Psalms. And one thing you'll notice about the Psalms of Judaism is that they include every emotion: love, hatred, sadness, a desire for revenge, anger, tenderness, silence. Those are all human emotions. If you don't feel them, somebody does. Somebody does. So what I like about the Psalms is that when they pray, they pray through those emotions. They give those emotions to God. They give those emotions to the open space. Now, that doesn't mean that God feels revenge or God is angry or that kind of thing, but it does mean there's a place to which all those emotions can be given. And I think faith is the freedom to be honest and to give those emotions to the open space. That's one face of faith. Another face of faith is, I call it the courage to take another step. I once visited a psychiatrist. I didn't visit her, but I had her speak at my college. And someone asked her, where have you seen faith in your role as a psychiatrist? And she says, I'll tell you where I have seen faith. I work with many people who have suffered from depression. Many people who wake up in the morning and they don't want to get out of bed. But for some reason, they take that foot and put it on the floor and walk across the room and brush their teeth. And she said, for them, the courage to take that step in light of what they were feeling, she said, that's faith. And it's amazing and it's marvelous. A third face of faith, and the final face of faith that I'll mention here, is the faith to be critical. And that includes being critical of your own religion. The faith to be able to look at the tradition that you may love, I may love. I can speak as a Christian here. There are aspects of Christianity which are beautiful, and there are aspects of Christianity that are appalling. And to have faith is the faith that somehow you're free to critique those idols, to be honest to the darker sides of your own religion, of my religion, and trust that somehow even in that act of criticism, it's welcomed into something deep and wide and beautiful. That's God. My experience is that people of faith kind of shift between two ways of thinking about God. Sometimes they think of God as a thou, a personal presence, a someone, a cosmic self. Dear God, please be with. Dear God, please take care. Dear God, I love you. Dear God, I'm so angry at you. Dear God, why? All of those are quite legitimate prayers, and they are addressed to a you, a thou, who receives them. That's the way it feels. The other way is to think of God as a mystery with an uppercase M. It's not so much to think of God as a thou. It's to think, it's like we're fish swimming in an ocean and God is the ocean. Not exactly like us fish, but somehow encompassing and including us. God is mystery. I think the life of faith can be in terms of God as thou and God as mystery. And sometimes it flips back and forth. And sometimes even in a given day, it can shift, even in a given hour. But in both instances, there's a kind of faith, there's a kind of attitude, there's a kind of trust in something more. I think that's faith. Okay. So Sophia, that was kind of my response to your poems. I hope that was okay. And I hope that it's clear. I think you can have faith and criticize your own religion, criticize those idols. Sometimes the most horrible thing can be our religion, but sometimes the most beautiful thing. We're free to be, we're free either way. And does that raise any thoughts for anybody, or anybody want to add something or challenge that idea? Anything's okay.
I do, Jay.
Okay.
It's Tim.
Hi, Tim.
This really hits home for me. I want to go back many years to when I entered seminary in 19 81, and it was quite a journey to get there because I was going in as an openly gay person, and that had not happened in this country before that. And I was led, or I followed a path that ended up there. And very early on, we had a discussion about faith, and the instructor or the professor and most of the student body talked about having a belief in whatever, Jesus or whatever it was. And that didn't at all ring true for me. And I don't know where my answer came from. It just sprung from inside. And I said, when we were asked what our thoughts of faith, I said, for me, faith is the opposite of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I have lived with that ever since. It's who I am. And it ties completely into what you're saying of trust, even to go to seminary in the first place, mm-hmm. and then continue on to ordination. But it was very profound within me, and I spoke it, of course, and I didn't get a lot of uptake on that one. Because people were really into belief rather than.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tim, that just makes so much sense. Thank you. The opposite of faith is fear.
And the opposite of fear is faith. And that I have lived that through my whole ordination journey and battle with the church over all those many years till I got ordained.
Dan, thank you, Tim. Dan. You're muted, Dan.
Oh my, there it is. How many years of Zoom? Sophia, I'm wondering if you might be able to offer a comment from the Sufi tradition of that balance of understanding God as both the thou and the mystery. So I love the Sufi reference to God as friend, companion, like that more intimate kind of a connection. But then also clearly there's this understanding of the God beyond. And from the Sufi tradition, how might you speak about that, or how might the poets speak about
that? Yes, same here, Dan.
It's contagious.
Yeah. Well, when you look at the poetry of Rumi and Hafiz, you will definitely see that God appears very, very close to human heart and human soul. God is more like a friend at times, father, family member, a beloved companion, a companion on travel in life, anybody that we need at a certain moment in time. As a close companion, God appears like that, a teacher, a master, a guru. So that is definitely the recurring theme in most of the Sufi poetry that I have read. I don't know whether I'm drawn to only that kind of poetry, but that's most of the poetry that I have read. But in my own personal life, because I do prescribe to my religion as a religion which looks at God as thou, and also being a Sufi, I think it's always keeping that tension of the opposites and holding it steadily within yourself and relying on the well which is needed most at that time. Sometimes it's really helpful to look at God as thou, the omnipotent, the strong, the one who's going to just take care of everything and just manage it, and I have nothing to worry about. But sometimes I need to dip into that well when God is my deepest companion and a beloved to my soul. So I think I've gotten good at keeping that tension and enjoying it and relying on whatever dimension or whatever well I need to nurture my soul from that time. I can't speak for others though.
I'd like to say something, Sophia.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that when we say Allahu Akbar,
Mm-hmm.
Allahu Akbar, and that's often translated God is great or God is greater. I really love that phrase. And the way I understand it is God is always greater than my concept of God. God is always greater than my concept of God. And not necessarily because God is so far away, but maybe because God is closer than my concept allows. And so the Muslim tradition, the Sufi tradition, I think it's in the Quran, that God is closer to us than even our own breathing.
Yeah, it's
Even
a tradition. It's for a verse which is translated as God is closer to us than our jugular vein.
Yeah.
So that's where it comes from. Yeah.
And so for my part, as a Christian influenced by Islam, when I hear Allahu Akbar, I think God is always greater than my concept of God, because closer to me than my own jugular vein. And I've always found that very helpful to, as an antidote, a corrective to having too many solidified images of God. You can have them, but be careful.
And one thing actually that really helps us, I'm glad you brought this part in discussion, is that, and sometimes we translate as Allahu Akbar as God is beyond our imagination, or God is different from or bigger than our consciousness. Or God is more than anything that we can believe him or imagine him to be. So we are so discouraged from imagining God or having an image of God to hold what we cannot imagine very, very close to us in our consciousness. So not having an image also, or not trying to create an image of God also helps to keep this force, this divine force, really close to us.
Sophia, maybe this is a good occasion to turn to imagination, which is our second letter.
This is an excellent segue. So we have imagination and play, yes. I for imagination and P for play, and they're both, I think, alike in some way, because both of them demand freeing your heart, mind, and soul and let go. In better words, I would say open up. Imagination and play, they both ask you to just open yourself up. In imagination, there are no rules. There is just a passion for freedom. What I like about this letter I for imagination is that each one of us have our own unique imaginarium, which is our own unconscious worldview, by our own individual experiences, by our group experiences, by our religious images that we create through which God comes to us. We have our own unique imaginarium. And the richer the imaginarium is, the more we grow spiritually. So one thing that I want to say about imagination is, which is kind of, it comes out from this first poem that I'm going to give you, is that sometimes our traditions or our education or even religion can stifle imagination. I have felt that at times. And generations of people actually have grown up in environments which are hostile to imagination. So maybe if time permits, in the second half of the class, I would love to hear from some of you your own personal experiences, that while you were growing up, what was the role of imagination in your life, in your religious community? But for now, let me give you this gem from Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, who, like many other mystics, believed that our religious and educational environments can be hostile to creative thinking and imagination. So Maulana says, unknown existence, undiscovered beauty, that's how you are. Unknown existence, undiscovered beauty, that's how you are. So far, so far. But one dawn, just like a sun, right from within, you will rise. The second thing, and that was Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. The second thing I want to add about imagination, which is related to this poem, is that I think art, which is very important in Sufi Islamic tradition, is related to imagination. It borns out of imagination. All our mistakes, including Hafiz Shirazi, including Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, they all engaged in different forms of art: poetry, literature, writing, calligraphy, Hebrew art, architecture. And their art was fueled by their imagination. And it was infused by with their faith. So here is another gem from Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, in which he says, in your light, I know love. In your beauty, I make poetry. In your light, I know love. In your beauty, I make poetry. Or in your light, I discover love. In your beauty, I make poetry. You suddenly dance inside my chest, hidden from everyone's view. And my art becomes this expression. My art becomes your expression. So these are the two poems I wanted to bring you about imagination. And before we go to play, I just want to say one more thing, that sometimes we take our imagination very lightly. And I just want to emphasize, and I'm sure Jay will do that too, that our whole life, our whole worldview is shaped and also limited by our imagination. Things are as we imagine them to be. Our world is or can be what we imagine it to be. So if we can imagine something, we can make it happen. So next letter, after imagination, very much entwined with the same theme, is P for play. When setting out on a journey, never seek advice from those who have never left home. That's Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. And our mistakes have a beautiful way to tell us that do not take life seriously. They encourage us in most of their poems, do not take life too seriously, take it lightly. Let things come and go, and you flow in them. And why do they say that? Because they think that anything we know is not worth knowing. And what's worth knowing cannot be known through our ways. So there is a strong encouragement on letting go, which is very, very hard for people like me. But from Rumi, I give you this poem again. Maulana says, I'm a spinner in dance. I want a musician who spins with me. See how playful he is in this poem. I'm a spinner in dance. I want a musician who spins with me. I want a Venus twisting like a Saturn. I'm the life seeking the essence. I'm the life seeking the essence of the soul. I'm not a sad bird in ruins like an owl. So now you play is this beautiful, joyful expression of our being. It's the heart of our creativity. And a lot of time there is this criticism on religious people or spiritual people that they take things too seriously. There is not enough role of play in their life. There is not enough humor in their life. Um, and actually, Jay will talk about humor, so I'm not going to go there. I'll give you one more poem before I hand it over to Jay, which will bring in a little touch of humor. And this poem is by Hafiz Shirazi. So Hafiz says, I have 1,000 brilliant lies. I have 1,000 brilliant lies for the question, how are you? And I have 1,000 brilliant lies for the question, what is God? If you think that the truth can be known from words, if you think that the sun and the ocean can pass through a tiny opening like mouth, oh, someone should start laughing. Someone should start wildly laughing now. I have 1,000 brilliant lies for every question you have. So Jay, that's imagination. I for imagination and P for play. And I hand it to you with these 4 poems.
Sophia, did you use the word imaginarium? That's the best word I've heard in the past 10 years. I'd never heard that word. At first, I thought you said aquarium. Now, I myself think of God as kind of like an ocean, and we swim inside the ocean. Or, if you wish, an aquarium, and we're fish inside the water of the aquarium. But I love the idea of rethinking that, rethinking the ocean in which we live and move and have our being. And that's from the New Testament, by the way. God is that in which we live and move and have our being. In which we live and move and have our being. Maybe we live and move and have our being in a deep imaginarium. Maybe we live and move and have our being inside a richly creative imaginarium. And our task, maybe we can partake of that in some way with our imaginations. Whitehead spoke of God as the poet of the universe, the poet of the world. That's in this spirit. I want to just talk about ordinary ways that imagination plays an important role, probably for most of us. In the first, I will call reframing. I remember one time I was on my way, I had to go to mainland China. And I had to teach a course there, and I didn't want to go. It wasn't that I had anything against the Chinese. I just didn't want to go. And it became worse and worse. And the closer I had to go, the more despondent I became. And a friend said to me, Jay, you need to reframe that. you need to learn to think of that in a fresh way, or you are going to be miserable. And she was right. And so one role that imagination plays, I think, for all of us is giving us, it's the capacity to reframe situations so that we can approach them in a fresher way. It can be a sadness, it can be a sickness, it can be a broken relationship. I mean, you know, you name it. But maybe God is the lure to reframe, the lure to reimagine a situation in a fresh way. I think a second place that I see imagination afoot is in curiosity. I do wish that the spiritual alphabet included C for curiosity, because I think it's kind of a holy emotion. It's being curious. How do things work? What's going on? It's all scientists have the gift of curiosity. It's at the heart of good science. It's also at the heart of a lot of good art. Let me try this. Let me try that. What works? What doesn't work? How would this be? People who love history, who like to learn about history, they're curious. So I think the imagination finds its way, God finds God's way into our hearts through curiosity. Sometimes. I want to mention just one more way that the imagination and maybe God can be found, and it's through dreams. You know, the Sufi tradition is rich in its taking dreams seriously as one way that God can sometimes be at work in our lives. Sufi tradition isn't alone there. Psychology of Carl Jung says the same thing. I mean, there's plenty of people in the Hebrew tradition, in the rabbinical traditions, until modern times, dreams played a profound role. Also in the Christian tradition. But dreams are one place where perhaps God reaches us and we find God, and it's deeply imaginal. Dreams are part of the imaginarium. So reframing, curiosity, dreams. Also, one thing, the prophets of the Hebrew Bible, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, Prophet Elijah, Prophet Jeremiah, peace be upon them all. That's an Islamic way to speak. But what did the prophets do? They had what you call the prophetic imagination. In the prophetic imagination, that's a phrase used by the biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann. It has two sides. On the one hand, the prophetic imagination looks at the way the world is, and it says, this is not the way things ought to be. So this is denunciation. This is not the way things are meant to be, can be. So the prophetic imagination has a negative side. It says no. No. And you certainly see that no-saying capacity in Prophet Jesus, Prophet Muhammad, Prophet Moses. The other side of the prophetic imagination is to say, and this is the way things can be. It says yes to how the world could be and can be if we give ourselves to that. Well, certainly in the biblical traditions and the Quranic tradition, that kind of imagining, that's Martin Luther King Jr. imagining, that's Mohandas Gandhi imagining, a no and a yes. There too, I think we see the imagination. All right, I can't wait to get to play, Sophia. But that's it for imagination for me. But you asked the question. I'm kind of curious. How about everybody here, or some of you? Did you grow up? If you grew up in a religious tradition, was it friendly to the imagination, or hostile to the imagination, or somewhere in between? Anybody like to share? I think we'd be interested. Anybody grew up in a really imagination-friendly religious environment? When you were 6, 7, 8, 9, your teachers taught you, want to know God? Imagine. Okay, I have no yeses on that.
I'll say something.
Okay.
I didn't grow up in the church. And when I started going to church, when I was in my, like around 30, a few people said to me, you're so free because you don't have any limitations that were put on you growing up with ideas of what church is and religion and God. And of course, I didn't really understand what they were talking about. I just said, well, this is just how I grew up. I don't know these things. So they said it was a gift. It's like, okay.
That's really great. You brought that spirit into the church, right?
I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maggie.
Hi. I'm a child of the manse, as they say, so a preacher's kid. And one of the earliest things that my family did when I was an eager reader and loved stories was to introduce me to C.S. Lewis. And I've always thought of that as being a very an act that was very friendly to the imagination, to inspire the imagination, and also to give a child permission to imagine a different world, a different way of living, to imagine God in a different way. All of those pieces came together in there for me. So those, all of those books still on the shelf here.
Mm-hmm.
That's so interesting. Thank you, Maggie. Deb.
So I guess I did grow up with a very strong, encouraged imagination in my early religious school in Judaism as well as at home, because what I was taught was that you cannot in any way define or constrain God, because otherwise you're limiting God. So God is up to you, and your relationship with God is up to you. So I had to create that myself. And that was what I learned about Judaism. So yes, we were encouraged in all kinds of ways.
Deb, did you grow up in the Jewish tradition where if
Yes.
you write the word God in English, you cross out the O?
Well, yeah, you don't write the name of there. We don't have the name of God. There's a word in Hebrew that is used, and incorrectly by non-Jews. They often think of it as, but it's unpronounceable in Hebrew because you cannot pronounce or name. We have all of, similar to Islam, all of the qualities of God, all the attributes of God that we can think of, but none of them is God's name.
I never thought of that until right now as an invitation to imagine. I should have, but I didn't. That's great.
And
Sophia,
when you were talking about faith, to me, I don't want to go back to the whole discussion, but faith for me is just intricately linked with gratitude.
Yeah. Sophia, would you say a word just about the other side, what it might be like to grow up in a religious context where the imagination is stifled. You can speak from your experience or your observation, whatever. I think it'd be good to hear about that side of things.
Well, I think that whenever you have a lot of do's and don'ts of religion told to you while you're growing up, what you can or cannot do, how you can or cannot think about God, how you cannot or can talk to God or talk about God or worship God, it definitely stifles imagination. At least that's what it does to me, because I have always believed in having a relationship with God, not having God as a part of somebody who gives me practices and rituals. So I grew up in this culture in which I was told what is religion, what is right, and what is a religion of right and wrong, a culture of right and wrong, not religion. So I think that is just not conducive to imagining a relationship with divine. However, there are other things, and I would also talk about them. Like, what really helps imagination is reading poetry, which we all are doing, reading literature, watching movies, listening to music, visiting museums, storytelling, doing like exercises with music or brushwork, walking in nature, looking at clouds and seeing the image for me. So for me personally, on one hand, I grew up in a culture which was very structured around religion with do's and don'ts, which I think is not good for children when we are raising them. But I also had a lot of reading and writing and imagery that opens up the imagination. And also, I think this whole C.S. Lewis books and Harry Potter series that have opened up the imagination of the generation of my children immensely. I saw them growing up with Harry Potter and what it did for their imagination.
Now you have 2 children, right?
Yeah.
Were they raised as Muslim?
Yes, both of them. Yeah. Jay, we are very close to the end. We have 7 minutes, but will you cover talk about play at all today, or?
I'll say a word about play. But I wonder if I saw Shannon had a remark. Shannon, would you say what you're going to say, and then we'll close with play? And do you have a poem to end us with, Sophia, as well?
I'll use a verse from Maulana. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Shannon, are you still here?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was thinking, I wasn't raised in a church setting, but I had a very creative family. And I wonder if I had curiosity early on about joining a faith, because my mother said, you pick. It's up to you to choose your faith, you or your religion, or whatever path you want to follow. And my first connection was with some Christians, and I had a lot of questions. And I wonder if the adults who were addressing those questions had a more creative way of responding, or use their imagination a bit more with me, if I would have been more attracted to that spiritual path. Because I was asking very concrete kind of kid questions about, how did they fit all those animals on the ark, and kind of like, stuff that is very literal. And the people responding to me I didn't get a response that made me curious to continue. So I went to an Eastern faith in the end, for a long period of time. But more recently, I was at some kind of a workshop, and they were introducing godly play, which I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but the person doing the sample was amazing. And she had a sandbox, and she was telling a story about, I guess, maybe Sarah and Abraham or something. So it was like the story, but at the end of the story, all she had is wondering questions. So I wonder about this aspect of the story, and I wonder about what they were thinking or how they were feeling. So it was encouraging children. No children were there, as it was just an example, but it was really encouraging curiosity and imagination around going deeper into the stories. And I thought that was a really nice way to get children more engaged in their in their religious path, right? So anyway, that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, thanks. Well, speaking of children, and so just a word about play. Let's simply take note of the fact that in Hinduism, they speak of divine play very forthrightly. And so a profound dimension of the holy, of the sacred, of God is the playfulness of God. And the universe itself evolves out of, in part, the impulse to play that's at the heart of the divine. Now, I know a little bit about play because I'm a new grandfather. And I've never been a grandfather in my life, but I am. And my little grandson, by the way, his name is Ezra, E-Z-R-A, nice Jewish name, but also a Muslim name, Azra. And I'm so happy about that. Well, Ezra is learning to play. And when you get adults around children that are learning to play, they want to play with them. You want to get down on the floor and you want to play with them. And when you play, you enter into a different world. It's a liminal space, L-I-M-I-N-A-L, a liminal space. It's not exactly this world, it's another world. And it's free. And joyful in a certain way. So Jesus said, suffer the little children to come unto me, for theirs is the kingdom of God. I think Jesus may have had an eye for play. That it wasn't simply the innocence, it was the innocence of a capacity to play. Related to play is humor. And many of us can get a feeling that religion is very serious. Very serious. And that play and laughter, they don't exactly have a place in it, but it doesn't take you long to get into Judaism and discover many forms of humor. It doesn't take you long to get into Zen Buddhism and meet Zen priests and realize that humor is a profound religious sensibility. What's going on in humor? In laughter. It's one of the same things that's going on in tears and crying. In humor, in laughter, the ego drops away. The ego drops away. When you really laugh, there's a dropping away of so much self-seriousness into the burden of the ego. So I just want to put in a good word for humor and play as essential to the healthy religious life. Sophia, with that, I'll ask you to bring things to a close, but thanks to everybody for being here today, tonight. Sophia.
And helping Jay and I create this interfaith community of process and poetry. We are deeply appreciative of your presence here. Let's close with this verse from Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, in which he says, there are many ways to divine. There are many ways to divine. I have chosen the way of song, dance, and laughter. What have you chosen? So I think I would like to close by this question. What is your way to divine? Yes, faith could be one way. Belief could be another way. Laughter can be a way to divine. Play can be a way to divine. Imagination can be a play to divine. So let's keep thinking, let's keep searching and finding out our own unique ways to divine. Till next week, peace, salam, and shalom to all of you. Good night.